people want to hang around with somebody who's having a good time. I'm grateful for every second that I'm in the studio. All sessions end. Even if it's 5 o'clock in the morning, it'll end. So you choose. How's your attitude? Is your attitude good or is it bad? And if your attitude's bad, no one's going to hire you ever. But if it's good, right till the last second, they'll come back feeling stronger, and so will you.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Today's episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is sponsored by Roswell Pro Audio, maker of handcrafted microphones in California. Inspired design and impeccable attention to detail will help you capture a gorgeous vintage sound without the vintage price tag. Check out their beautiful line of microphones at roswellproaudio.com. Sending your music to be mastered can be scary, but sending your music to a total stranger for mastering can be really scary. Chris Graham is a Billboard chart-breaking mastering engineer with thousands of credits and knows how to make your record sound fantastic. But more importantly, he understands that there is one person that really knows what a great record sounds like, and that's you, rock stars. So if you're thinking about hiring professional mastering, but not sure if it's right for you, go to chrisgrahammastering.com and get a free sample mastering of your song. Go find out just how great your record can sound at chrisgrahammastering.com. Just click the link included in the show notes. Howdy, Rockstars. Lid Shaw, your host of Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from professionals so that you can take your records to the next level, make your best record ever, and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is a continuation of my guest from last week, the amazing Jim Scott, Grammy-awarded recording engineer, producer, mixer, and he had so much great stories to tell us on the episode last week that I decided to just go ahead and continue with the second episode this week. So hang in there. I hope you enjoy this. Here's more from Jim Scott. Thanks for listening. Cheers. Jim, are you ready to jam?
I am. Let's go.
Awesome, man. Well, so we were just talking about working with Tom Petty. You're talking about working with Rick Rubin at Sound City, which that was the studio that the wonderful documentary was made by Dave Grohl. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So Rockstars, I'll include a link to that in the show notes as well, because that's a wonderful film to go check out, a history of a great studio. One of the things that I always love about Tom's voice is when I hear him sing, it makes me feel like I could write some lyrics, and it just something about his voice makes me want to try and write a song and sing. Can you talk about how you would approach recording his vocals on a record?
Sure. I'd love to. Well, Tom is not a loud singer, and he's not a loud guitar player. And almost, most of the stuff that we recorded with Tom, he played acoustic guitar and sang at the same time. And so your challenges are, especially if you need to do any kind of repairs, is how to keep the vocal separate from the guitar and the guitar separate from the vocal, which when you have, big, expensive microphones just a few inches away from each other is kind of impossible. So the choice for us was to just use the most beautiful sounding microphones on his voice and the most beautiful sounding microphones on his guitar. And even though we printed them on two tracks, a guitar track and a vocal track, it became one, it was one sound.
Yeah.
That's the sound. And if you change the guitar balance, you change the vocal balance. And if you change, turning the guitar up wasn't as easy as you might think, because then the vocal would go up. So yeah, it's just a commitment. This is the sound. This is it. This is what you're going to get. And a reminder, rock stars, when you do that, Jim, you have to check the polarity of the mics against each other, right? That can make a big difference. Oh yeah, you gotta always keep that in the back of your mind. You don't want to be the guy flipping phase buttons all day, and it's kind of like once you know you're right, then you're right, and so stop. You don't need to check it all the time, And the hard part was like if, like a week would go by and Tom would say, I got to fix that line. Well, you were punching in on the one that was there and erasing it. It wasn't like Pro Tools where you could just have 100 tracks and fish through them later. And, we might have one pair of tracks that he could go to try and experiment, but, you had to get the same guitar and the same mic, and you had to match the sound up, and he had to be singing in the same voice, and the guitar strings had to have the same amount of wear on them, and you had to be able to punch in and not hear it. And, those are challenges that we had then that we really don't have now, because you can, you get all the tracks are cheap. You can have all the tracks you want. And
that was a good example of when recall was helpful, was to know what you used.
I kept a lot of notes during those times about what mic I used, what the serial number of the mic was, and and I still do that today. I mean, I wouldn't document a mix anymore, but I would certainly document a vocal sound if I knew that it was particularly good and I needed to get back to it. And sometimes I just give that information to my artists as they go on in their careers, because they like to know. They like to know. It's kind of their business, it's their voice.
Well, what were some of the mics that you like to choose for Tom?
We almost always used a C12 on his vocal, an AKG C12, which is a very expensive, unattainable kind of a mic these days. And on the acoustic guitar, I almost always used an old Neumann U87 and an AKG 452, sort of like a good mic, bad mic combination on his guitar. And depending on how bright you wanted it or how thick you wanted it, you could change the balance between the 452 and the 87. And
interesting. So side by side. So two mics right there with the diaphragms next to each other?
Yeah, right next to each other. As long as they're in phase, then just the frequency response of the microphone is your best equalizer. You're a little bit brighter, you favor the 452, and a little bit thicker and woodier, you favor the U87. And of course, those were printed to one track so that you can change your mind on the guitar sound later. And
nice. And may I ask another question? So I'm familiar with the AKG 451. I have a pair of those when they're the small diaphragm. I have the cardioid head on it. What's the 452? Is it similar to a 451? Is it a small diaphragm mic?
Yeah, they look identical. I don't really know what the difference is. I think the 452 had, or maybe they all do, the ability, you could change the capsule and put pads in them and change the shape of what the microphone likes to hear, whether it's an omni capsule or a figure of 8 capsule or something like that.
And generally speaking, the U87 Rockstars is a large diaphragm condenser and the 452 is a small. So it's that combination of a large diaphragm condenser and a small one that gives you those EQ balances, which is cool.
That's right. And then each of those channels, the vocal mic would have a compressor on it, and the combined acoustic guitar microphones would also have a compressor on it. And that worked well for Tom because, like I said, he didn't sing loud and he didn't play loud. So there was the compression just added. It didn't really, I didn't do it to change the dynamic. I did it to make the sound that we recognized as his vocal sound.
Yeah, that's cool advice. And we hear that a lot, I think, is to remember sometimes to treat a compressor more as a tonal choice.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, without question.
Yeah. Well, very cool. So let's see. Talking about recording voice and acoustic guitar, you were also fortunate to make a couple of records with Johnny Cash. Would you like to share any stories about working with that? I mean, it's how do you? I mean, I'm a little nervous even just thinking about putting a mic in front of Johnny Cash. What would you like to tell us?
Well, this was my experience. Rick decided they were going to work together, and there was Johnny Cash had made 1 million records with all kinds of with his different bands and groups, and Rick decided especially on that first record, American Recordings, that it was just going to be his voice and his guitar. We don't need a band, don't need production. All we need is Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
And he was right. Yes,
yes, he was.
So during those early get-togethers, we actually set Johnny Cash up. Rick he didn't really have a recording studio at his house at the time, but he had a nice living room. And what he wanted Johnny to do was just to be comfortable and be musical, and to sit there in front of a guitar mic and a vocal mic and sing every song that he knew. That was the goal. So nice. It was just going to be easy, breezy, come in, sing some songs, do a couple takes of each song, and then sing another song. And, Johnny Cash probably knows thousands of songs. Yeah. So we actually set him up with an ADAT machine, and I put an SM7 on his voice with a compressor, and a 452, just one 452 acoustic guitar mic. And John and Rick would just sit there together. I was there for some of it. I was there for a few days doing some of it, but honestly, all I was doing was push and record and stop. And Rick realized that he could do that, so he and John just sat there for several days and just recorded takes of songs. And then later, John took that same setup and went down to the cabin, his cabin, with his engineer, and did more. So I didn't record all of the songs that Johnny recorded. I did a lot of them. Mm-hmm. I mixed that album. I mixed that American Recordings record, and nice. And it was it's like, yeah, it's 2 tracks. How hard is it? How hard is it to mix?
But how hard was it?
Well, here's what we did. We were just trying to figure out how to get the best sound out of those recordings. So I set up several different pairs of those tracks, and on each of those pairs of tracks, I would put like a different pair of compressors and then record them to a different tape recorder running at a different speed and a different alignment. So I think we had 4 different choices. I think we had, 4 different pairs going through 4 different chains to 4 different tape recorders. And then we just did shootouts, just play it back. Which one do you like? So once we found the combination that we liked, we didn't do it again for every song, but it's if you have enough time and you have the interest and you can understand what you're hearing, different is different. And if you want a brighter one, you use a brighter tape alignment. If you want a darker one, you use a slower tape speed and a different alignment or a darker compressor. So we were just trying to get it to sound right, whatever right is. We were just trying to get it to be, well, let's compare this one to that one. Which one do you like? Okay, well, I like this one better. All right, good. Now let's compare that one to another one. Which one do you like better? So that was all the experimenting that we did. But
it's a really cool example of kind of doing the experimenting in a reverse order, where it's like you removed all that stuff from the front end of it. Like you didn't let any of that get in between capturing a great song and a performance.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's so cool to hear about using an SM7, a 452, and an ADAT. Those are very crazy, accessible, right? Pieces of gear,
No doubt. I was using SM7 on Jeff Tweedy too. They one time out at his warehouse in Chicago at the Loft, they had, he'd bought a real expensive tube microphone and spent many thousands on it, and we put it up. We were so excited. We put it on his vocal mic, and he sang a couple songs, and it was like, I hate it. So we put the SM7 back up, and it's like, well, there's my sound. So,
yeah, well, there's a great deal of importance to familiarity too in recording. I mean, I think
Anthony Kiedis always used an SM7.
Oh, no kidding! All right, cool.
For the 2 records that I did with him, each of those I bought a new SM7 for each album, and that's the one he sang on. And that was his mic.
Let's go there. Let's talk about working with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So cool. You made some great records with those guys.
Thank you.
Why don't we break it down a little bit? Tell us about recording Chad Smith on drums. What's some of what makes that drum sound for the Chili Peppers?
Well, Chad's a big boy, and he's a big hitter, and he hits the drums really hard, but not so hard that he chokes them to the point where they don't respond. Sometimes you can hit a drum too hard, and it just like isn't big anymore. It just ugh. But Chad likes to have a bright, ringy, alive snare drum, and it's not a real roomy drum sound with him ever. It's pretty immediate. It's pretty in your face. Pretty no frills. It's just a lot of impact and natural resonance. And room mics aren't a big part of it. I think the farthest room mics were just at like a couple feet, just 2 or 3 feet away from the front of the drum set. It wasn't 10 feet or 20 feet at all. It was really close.
And where did you guys record the drums?
Most of the time we were at either Sound City or Ocean Way.
Okay.
We did Californication at Ocean Way. And I guess we also did By the Way at Ocean Way. Yeah.
So, Jim, there is a rumor that is floating around that Rick Rubin, and I'm wondering if this is you as well, would sometimes for Chili Peppers record the drums with nothing but SM57s. Would you like to comment on that rumor or dispel that myth?
Yeah, I never did that, but but you sure can. I would. I can tell you right now that if you put an SM57 on everything, it would not affect sales. You would sell just as many copies. And in fact, I did a session with Ron Nevison. Ron Nevison is a famous record producer, The Who and the Rolling Stones and everybody. And we did a live remote with him of the David Johansen Band in New York playing on New Year's Eve. Yeah. And it was nuts. And he said, we had the record plant truck and all the best stuff in the world. And he said, yeah, just put a 57 on everything, overheads, hi-hat, kick drum. I was like, Ron, we got good microphones. I'd be happy to put up the real stuff. He's like, no, just put 57s on everything on the drum set. It'll be fine. And he was right, because it's like at the end of the night, it was total chaos and people were on the stage and everything got stolen. And it was, it was just as well that we didn't, like put $10,000 worth of microphones up there. We put, like $500 worth of microphones up there.
I like to think that an SM57 sort of pre-EQs and filters the sound for a lot of the stuff you want to hear in music anyway. Would you say that there is any truth to that?
Absolutely. Almost every time you see Tom Petty on television, he's singing into an SM57. And I remember specifically going to the Tonight Show and have with them, and the house guy had a certain microphone, and Tom was going like, I don't know, man, I don't think this is going to work. And they're trying to get a sound, and there's feedback, and there's this and that. And finally, Tom just, had his guy just unplug it and plug in a 57 and start singing. And it's like, yeah, well, this sounds better, and this is what you're going to get. So there you go.
That's great.
It works. It works.
Well, what else about the drums? Anything else? I mean, these are complex drum parts on some of this stuff too. Does it involve comping takes? Is that part of a process to get a really great sounding Chili Peppers record?
Well, Chad is a real groove drummer, and his parts are complicated, but it always serves the song. And, Flea's bass parts are complicated, but it always serves the song. Yeah. We mostly just tried to make it exciting and tried to make it alive without being too bright. I mean, if you just brighten things up and then it hurts. We don't want it to hurt. We want it to be sweet, but clear. And, super tight miking, because you want to be able to hear all that detail, and you want to be able, when he does stuff on the hi-hat, you want to be able to hear it. But then, when he just unloads on that thing and halfway open and sloshing away, it can't blow up. It has to be, you really got to rely on your drummer musician ally to make the sound that he wants you to hear. That's the biggest part of it. And then if it's all just kicks and snares and eighth notes, it's a little easier. But if it isn't that, then you have to make sure that you that the recording doesn't become the problem. you want to,
Yeah.
things will sound natural if you allow them that opportunity. And then you just have to decide how much you need to step on it or not step on it to give it the impact that it deserves. So, Chad's great. He can really tune his drums and he can really play beautifully. And he's a really great guy. I love him.
Roswell Pro Audio brings you microphone design that is out of this world. Endorsed by a growing list of artists and producers like Phil Collen of Def Leppard, Ross Hogarth, who's recorded Van Halen, Ziggy Marley, and the Doobie Brothers, and Super Dupes, working with Drake, Mary J. Blige, and Eminem. These are all rock stars that have discovered just how great Roswell microphones sound. Check out the Mini K47, which uses a capsule modeled on the one in the vintage U47 at a street price of only $299, or the beautiful Delphos condenser microphone with a capsule tuned like the vintage U67 with great clarity and far lower noise at a street price of only $899. In fact, you are hearing my voice right now on the beautiful Delphos microphone. These mics are carefully crafted by hand and immediately feel good even before you plug them in and hear how great they sound. These are well-built microphones that will last you and your studio a lifetime of great recording. Check out more audio examples of these awesome mics at roswellproaudio.com. Are you thinking about hiring professional mastering for your song or record? Chris Graham is a Billboard chart-breaking mastering engineer who has mastered thousands of songs for both pro and home studio clients just like you. Send in your song and Chris will give you a free sample master of your mix. Book a project with Chris today and also get a free video mix consultation before mastering. This will help make sure your mixes are the best that they can be. So go to chrisgrahammastering.com today and get your free sample started and your record finally finished. Just click the link included in the show notes. Can you share a secret or a good tip about recording a hi-hat well?
I use a 57. I've tried everything. I use a 57 and I put it on the backside of the microphone opposite the stick. And it's been 10 years since I EQ'd a hi-hat.
So is it pointed at the hi-hat, but through the hi-hat towards where the snare is being hit?
No, the opposite side. I pointed like on the opposite edge of where he's hitting it with the stick is where I put the mic, pointing straight down at the edge of the hi-hat.
Okay.
I don't really point it over near the snare drum. There's usually enough pollution over there. And it always seems to be clean, and there's plenty of stick, and there's plenty of detail, and there's plenty of cymbal sound, and it's, just maybe a little farther away. I don't really want to, I want to hear the beat, but I don't want to hear the wood hitting the metal. I just want to hear the sound of the metal being hit, but I don't want to hear the stick hitting it, if that makes sense.
Okay,
it's like,
cool.
You don't want to hear tick, 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 tick. You want to hear, whatever. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
You'll see how that translates after it goes out on a podcast app on iTunes.
Yeah.
Well, what about overheads? How would you approach Chad's overhead miking for his drums?
I put, depending on I usually put large diaphragm condensers on the overheads. And again, you just have to keep your eye on the phasing so that the cymbals, go swish instead of going behind you or that they're the same volume left to right, or that your snare drum doesn't go away. And then I always put a mic up underneath the ride cymbal. A lot of guys don't, but like if a guy's got his crash cymbals up higher and he's crashing away, that's where you have to set the microphone level, because you got your microphones above those crash cymbals. But then 5 seconds later, he's going to be down on that ride cymbal, just sort of keeping time. And if he's not up on the bell, if he's not up on the, he's not up there tanging the hump, as they say in New Orleans. If he's not tanging that hump, if he's just riding on the ride cymbal, that's going to be really quiet compared to the crash cymbals. And then you go like, well, where's the beat? All I hear is kick and snare. I don't hear any beat. So I always put a microphone up underneath the ride cymbal from the bottom, And again, check your phase because it's a microphone facing a microphone. So something's going to be out of phase. So just be careful.
Yeah.
But that gives you the ability, if you have a separate track, then that's fantastic. But if you don't, well, just listen and make sure that when he's crashing, it sounds beautiful. And when he's riding, it sounds beautiful too. So I do that almost all the time. And I just certainly did it with Chad. And it just gives you details. You want those details. You don't ever want the time to go out of your groove. You just gotta make sure that you're feeling what the guy's playing.
You make a good point, which is we need to hear those cymbals. Cymbals usually give us the subdivision in a groove, and when they're too quiet in a mix and all you hear is kick and snare, I feel like it might take a moment for me to notice it sometimes, but the track and the song can start to feel kind of heavy and plodding when that happens.
Well, it just becomes 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of the subdivisions. It's just kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. It's like, yeah, well, we've all done that. And now people are still doing it because, now they get their samples out and they put their samples on top of the kicks and snares. And then it's even more clarity and it's even less subdivisions. And it's not always, even in an AC/DC record, there's plenty of hi-hat,
Yeah.
Like it's kick and snare for days, but it's also like the hi-hat's where it's at.
I'm glad you brought up phase. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of checking the polarity on all the drum mics? Is there sort of a routine that you go through? Do you start with one thing and then check the other things against that, for example?
Well, once I quickly go through each drum or each microphone that I'm using and I know that it sounds good and I have it where I want it individually, then when I have a guy, I usually say, well, play me a little bit of that funky beat or play me a little bit of that LA beat just so I can get it in a balance, just you can hear what he's playing. And then, you could just get the kick and the snare and the hi-hat and the tom-tom, everything in a nice balance. And while you're doing that, if you have 5 minutes before taking a take, go ahead and record that beat that he's playing. And then when you take, then say, well, come on in, let's hear that. And then when they come in to hear the sound that you're recording, if you could just sort of solo combinations of things, like you're trusting what your snare drum sounds like, but if you turn your tom-toms off and the snare drum gets louder, then you've got a problem with somewhere in one of your tom-tom mics or anywhere. That's just one example. So it's just a matter of listening and understanding what you're supposed to be hearing. And if you turn something off and something else gets a lot better, you've got a little problem. Or if you turn something on and something gets quieter, you're taking points off the board. So phase is a funny thing. You just have to sort of feel it. There is a way to listen for it. And there's also some scientific little boxes or some phase popper things that you can use to pop to see that things are in phase. But I just use my ears and, nowadays, even me with Pro Tools, I'm not as, since I'm not combining things, I'm not combining the whole drum set down to 2 tracks like I used to do back in the day. You still have the opportunity to flip the phase on something. If you mistakenly record a tom-tom out of phase compared to the other tom-tom, you can still flip it and magic will happen and it'll be okay. Or if it's even partially out of phase, I got a little labs. Jonathan Little makes a really cool box, a little phase thing that you can put things partially. You can change the phase of things partially. And also, honestly, with Pro Tools, you can just look at the waveform, and if it's out of phase, just move it until it's in phase. It's, there's so many ways to cover yourself now and fix the problem that you created. But
if you were listening to just a single mic on the kick drum and you chose one polarity versus the other, is there something we can see on the screen that is an indicator for us that one way is better than the other? Or do you listen with your ears and just start by, choosing?
Well, I don't look at the screen.
Okay, good.
The screen's not that's not my job. I got a very, very talented engineer who actually enjoys looking at the screen, and he helps me. He helps me to do things like that. I listen. I just listen. Yeah. And again, it's at this stage of the game for me, I've done it quite a bit, and it's not recording school. It's not recording school every day. I trust my instincts and I trust my experience, and we just sort of get on with it. You know?
Well, you see here at Recording Studio Rockstars, it is recording school every day.
Yeah, well, you know, that guy I was getting a drum sound for a guy, and he sat down. He said, "Man, sounds so good. This is such a good drum sound." He said, Can you tell, how do you do that? Can you show me how you do that?" I said, "Absolutely. Yeah. Come on, sit down right here. This is only going to take 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. Well, first you need to intern at the studio, and here's the mop.
Yeah. It's all of that.
Well, cool. So, all right, let's jump forward.
Okay.
I don't think I mentioned this in the intro. I forgot to, but the Tedeschi Trucks Band, that was a record that you did, and I wondered if you'd like to talk about working on that one.
Yeah, what a joy. What an honor. If you don't know who they are, you should give them a listen. You know, Susan Tedeschi has got one of the best voices in all of music. I couldn't love anyone's voice more. She's soulful. She's powerful. She's beautiful. She's emotional. She's a great guitar player too. I mean, stunning guitar player. And
yeah,
her husband is Derek Trucks, who, you know,
not a bad guitar player to have in your band.
One of the best ever, if not the best. And at his, you know, he's been playing for so long and started at such a young age and been in, you know, like the incredibly powerful bands and had his own career. And so they joined forces after they got married, and now they have this giant juggernaut leviathan of a band called the Tedeschi Trucks Band, 12 or 13 pieces. And, you know, what a just amazing. You know, it's all about, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You know, I had done records for, as you go through your career, you meet people and you stay in touch and you make friends. And, that particular band, the Tedeschi Trucks Band, has two drummers, and I had worked with both the drummers on different projects through the years. J.J. Johnson was, I worked with him on Doyle Bramhall's record, and Falcon Tyler had played with the Wood Brothers, a record that I produced. And so when they were pulling the band together, Derek was saying, like, well, who should we get to produce this record? And both the drummers said, well, you should just call Jim Scott. So I couldn't be happier or more grateful. And again, like I said, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So I got my chance at an audition. I got to meet them, and we hit it off. And so I did their first three records. I co-produced, engineered, mixed Revelator, which we won a Grammy for. And then I mixed the live album that came after that. And then the next album was amazing. And then so those three, for me, they're highlight reel records. I just have so many memories of making those records and just being in awe of the musicianship around me. I mean, it's so real and it's so authentic, and there's so little finagling going on after you get a take. I mean, something has to be way out you'd have to fix it. And if it was way out, they would probably just say, let's just play it again. I mean, the level of musicianship and talent, I've never seen anything like it. Making records with that many people in the room, and, just discovering how it all goes down with that many people. And
so
they're
what's the
such
instrumentation?
Beautiful people.
13 is a lot of people in a band.
Well, most of the time we would track with two drummers, bass player, Derek and Sue both playing guitar, Sue singing, Kofi playing at least one keyboard, probably two, piano or organ, Wurlitzer. So that's a lot of live mics on the floor.
Yeah.
And two drummers is always a challenge. Talk about checking for phase.
Yeah. I've never recorded two drummers. So what do you do? I mean, does one person get to be the kick drum? How does that work?
Well, I did it different both times. On the first record I made it like there was a left-handed drummer and a right-handed drummer. So the kicks and the snares were in the middle. Both kicks and both snares were in the middle, and the hi-hats were opposite and the floor toms were opposite. So there was like a left-handed drum set.
Yeah, like
and a right-handed
audience perspective, drummer perspective.
Yeah, I mean, both drum sets were stereo, with the kicks and the snares and the kick and snares in the middle. But the the hi-hats and the floor toms were on opposite. They're both right-handed drummers, but in the picture I made one of them a lefty, just so that when they're grooving along, you got a hi-hat on each side.
So what about the kicks adding up in the middle? And is that something that you just sort of rely on the musicianship of the drummers to solve?
Yeah. They don't always. I think depending on the song and depending on the groove, it always seemed to work out that there was sort of an alpha drummer. So somebody was really laying it down and somebody else was dancing around, but not always. Sometimes they were both digging in, and if both the kicks don't hit at the same time, it's like, there you go. They didn't hit at the same time, but so what? Like why do they have to? They're both playing the same song, and it's not loose. It's just like it instead of going oomph, it goes boom, boom, or it's so tight you can't even hear that they're apart. It's just a thing. And then on the next studio album that we did, Made Up Mind, the album called Made Up Mind, I decided just to have the kicks and snares were completely out of the middle, and I had a drummer on the left and a drummer on the right, which is more like an old Allman Brothers kind of thing. That's like the whole drum set was in mono on the left, and the whole drum set was in mono on the right. So when they did tom-tom fills, they didn't go across the speakers unless they were working together, which they do.
That's cool.
One guy starts a fill and the other guy finishes it. And they do that kind of stuff. And that was cool because that made all kinds of room in the middle for the bass and Sue's vocal and Derek's guitar. And I think the Made Up Mind record sounds amazing because the drums are still really loud, but they're hard left and hard right. And then there's all this room in the middle. So I
know when you're mixing in stereo and you collapse it to mono, it can cause you to make decisions to turn up the things that are panned left and right so that they balance. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? Correct me if you think I'm wrong about this, but how did that affect your mix decisions when you were hard panning the drums like that? Do you feel like that helped you make loud drum mix decisions because each one is just an individual speaker?
I can't honestly. I do that at my place. I have a mono button that I can hit and I can play back in mono. I don't think I ever really checked it when we were mixing the Made Up Mind record. I don't think we ever listened actually we did. We listened to the speaker there's a speaker on the tape recorder that
cool.
the mixing machine, the Ampex, there's a mono speaker, and we listened to it in that just for fun. And I don't remember ever thinking that anything was wrong. So
that's cool.
But mono radio is not really even a thing anymore,
Yeah, that's a good question about the whole stereo and mono thing and what informs your decision-making process. How often do you have to worry about things like surround sound and all these new formats that are always coming along?
Well, I just recently mixed a new Styx album in surround sound, which was so fun, so amazing, so great. I don't know if you've heard the record, but it is a thing, man. It is. You got to check it out if you haven't heard it. It is really, really, really a thing. It kind of sounds like the 70s because it was recorded like it was in the 70s, but at the same time, it's just amazing. It's like, where has this record been? How did I just uncover this record? The songs are great, and it's a I don't know.
Was it a new record or was it an older record being remixed?
No, it's a new record. They're all recorded, all new songs, all new concept, and they recorded it all in Nashville down there.
Cool.
At Blackbird, and I mixed it at Blackbird. Oh, great. And mixed it through the old Neve console and recorded, mixed it just like the good old days, mixed it to tape, and they recorded it to tape. So it's very, very analog sounding, but it's still loud and bright and clear and cool and creamy. And then
that was in Studio A there at Blackbird?
Yeah. And then I did the 5.1 mixes back at my studio on my old console. And it's a little bit of a challenge to, computers are smart and computers can do all kinds of things for you, but sometimes the limitations are better the limitations of a console are better, and having to do things by hand is makes it a little more meaningful than just allowing a computer to do everything for you. So the 5.1 mixes are amazing. and if you've never mixed in 5.1 or listened in 5.1, it's an experience. It's really a lot of fun. So yeah, you can still do it. You can still do all that kind of surround mixing by hand. You just have to know what you're doing and commit to it and do it.
That's cool.
It's easier. It's easier with a computer, I must say. But if you don't have one, or if you don't want to use one, then don't.
So just a quick aside question. Has Hangman finally come down from the gallows? Sorry, I just had to drop that in there.
That's okay.
That song was so front center for me as a kid, 8th grade dance, the school dances and stuff. That was just rocking. And I take my daughter every weekend. We go to a fried chicken place in Nashville that plays nothing but classic rock. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah, the Styx record sounds like it's right in between The Grand Illusion and Pieces of Eight. That's right where it lives, so late 70s. And it sounds, it sounds like Styx. It sounds like Queen. It sounds like Lawrence Gowan on his, the new singer that he'd been there for 15 years or something. But, yeah, you should give it a spin, man. I think you'd really dig it.
Tell us the name of the album and I'll put it in the show notes.
It's called The Mission.
The Mission. Groovy. All right. Well, let's hit a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. So we'll jump to some of these, the standard jam session questions for the outro. Jim, when you were starting out, what do you feel like was holding you back?
I don't really think anything was holding me back. I was committed. I was an adult. I had an adult job for many, many years before I decided to go into the music business full time. And I think the only thing that might have held me back professionally early on was I didn't have any sort of a manager, or I didn't have anybody hustling for me. I was just a guy with a landline. I was, back in the day, I just had a phone and a business card and I did records. But if people don't know you and there's no internet and there's no, word of mouth only goes so far. If somebody says, how do I find that guy that did that Sting record? Well, if nobody knows, then they're not going to find you. So I think, it's different now with the internet, but the only thing that held me back, if at all, was just not having any sort of a team or a manager or anything.
Yeah. Okay. I think you've already shared some of the best advice, which was sloppy studios make sloppy records, which is good. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to share that was that you received from anybody?
No, but I just learned that it's people want to hang around with somebody who's having a good time. So I'm grateful for every second that I'm in the studio. Even if somebody, all sessions end, even if it's 5 o'clock in the morning, it'll end. So, you choose. How's your attitude? Is your attitude good or is it bad? And if your attitude is bad, and if it's bad every day, no one's going to hire you ever. But if it's good, right till the last second, like, hey man, I know that was hard. I love you and I'll see you tomorrow. Let's have another great day. They'll come back feeling stronger, and so will you. It's your choice.
Yeah. People talk about in experiences, the end of an experience can really inform or dictate what we remember about the whole entire experience. So it's kind of cool to hear about you talking about wrapping up a long day in the studio on a real positive note like that. And that's hard to do at 5 a.m. sometimes.
It is. But
do you have like a time frame around a day that you usually like to work, or do you just still remain flexible depending on each record? Any advice about that?
Well, it's pretty flexible because everyone's world is different. But, for me, it's still a 12-hour day of work, business day. I like to come to the studio. I like to be ready for my artist at 11 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I like to try to get out there by about 11 at night. So, a great day in the studio for me is I get to the studio at about 10 and I get ready and I clean up whatever isn't cleaned up, and I'm there, I'm relaxed, everything is good. The artists walk in, and sometimes we just, have coffee and shoot the breeze, and sometimes we listen to an overdub, but we all get together, and then I like to have lunch early. I like to have lunch at 12 or 12:30. Mm-hmm. And we always, at my studio, we always we have a little kitchen, so I shop, and we always make food. So we don't always have to order every meal out. It's just ordering food out is just such a problem. Yeah. I think people would rather they'd just rather have a sandwich than to look at the menu book and decide which Taco Bell to go to. And then somebody's got to go, and it's horrible. So we make food around lunch, and then after lunch, between lunch and dinner, 5 or 6 hours there, we just have a great day. We work hard. We do whatever we have to do, track, overdub, mix, fix, write, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then same thing. It's like I like to have dinner on the table by 7:00. And again, we cook simple food, and it just keeps everybody's nose out of the menu book and keeps somebody from going to one place and another place, and the food shows up in styrofoam, and it's just horrible for the planet, and it's expensive, and you eat bad. And so we eat healthy food, and I like to have conversation. I want to all sit down at a table together and have a bottle of wine and eat some healthy food, and then by 8:00 we're back in there, and everyone's feeling good and got energy, and we have a nice night session, and then finish up whenever the time is right. Sometimes we stop at 10, sometimes we stop at 2, but as long as it's good and as long as we're making progress, and sometimes sometimes the nighttime is the right time, and then you just. So that's a great day for me is 11 to 11. Sometimes I wish it was shorter, but it just takes a certain number of hours to make a record, and I make them fast, but sometimes it just takes the time it takes. It just does.
I think that's a great answer, and I love hearing you break it down like that. You strike me as somebody who's pretty healthy, having done this for a long time too. Do you have any advice or you want to talk about how you talk about eating healthy? Is exercise part of your routine, and is there a way that you include that with 12-hour days in the studio?
Yeah, well, it is for me, and believe me, it's you sit there all day long, and you have a tendency to put on a couple pounds, and you're working really hard, and you think, I deserve to feel better, so maybe I need a little glass of wine, or maybe I need a cold beer, or maybe I need a shot of tequila, or maybe I need something stronger, or maybe I need whatever I need. And that's all fine. That's all fine for you. But, a lifetime of doing that every day, 30, over, I don't know how many years it's been a lot of years, and that's a lot of hours, and that's a lot of sitting in a chair on my rear end. And I just know for me, like, I'm going to drink a beer every day, no problem. I'm probably going to have a shot of Jack with my singer before she goes in to sing. Mm-hmm. I'll do that. I would love to do that every day. If she needs a shot of Jack, so do I. Let's go do it. But at the same time, you got to drink a lot of water. You got to keep your mind healthy. You got to keep your thoughts pure. You got to find that time in the morning to stretch a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to get computer neck. And then, believe me, I didn't have computer neck. I had console and Studer remote neck. That just about put me out of the business. I sat there in front of a Neve console and a Studer remote for 10 years, 12 hours a day, 300 days a year, and I just about ruined myself. It was really hard. So yeah, I lift weights and I stretch, and I finally, if you're healthier, what's the mystery? If you're healthy, you're healthy. And honestly, without, this may not be for everyone's, maybe this isn't what you want to hear on your podcast, but this hasn't been my healthy year. I had cancer this year, and I beat it, and I intend to live a long time, and I intend to get back to exercising, and I am. So, not every, I'm sure some people are rolling their eyes, but for me, it's better for me if I stretch and exercise and it's take a half an hour to myself to concentrate on having a clear head and a healthy body, and then you go do whatever you want to do.
Well,
so that's it. I'm not judging anyone. I'm not judging anyone, but I'm just saying for me, I need to spend a little bit of time on me and then I can spend a lot of time on everybody else.
I think that's great advice to hear. And I think that, for us to be able to do this every day, a band may come into the studio and work intensely for one record, and then they go back to more of a normal life routine. But for us to be in the studio every day, it's always that. So finding that balance is great. And I'm sorry, I didn't know that you had been through cancer this year, so I'm glad to hear that you beat that. And congratulations.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah.
Well, so let me just jump forward to the last question, and we'll wrap up. We're going to take the studio Wayback Machine, and you're going to go back in time and find young Jim Scott, I guess playing in a band or maybe in the first studio as a janitor. And you're going to give yourself one bit of advice. If you could say, this is the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day, what would you go back and tell yourself?
I tell myself this now all the time. Like, I'm a producer, I'm an engineer, and a mixer. And that's all very, very good. But if I don't have an artist, I don't have anything. What am I going to produce, engineer, and mix? Nothing, because I need an artist. So it all starts with music. It all starts with the artist. And I feel very, very fortunate every time somebody wants me to listen to one of their songs and maybe possibly think about working together. Because if I don't have an artist in front of me, I don't really even have a job. I got all the equipment that I could ever want. I got all the instruments I could ever want. I got a beautiful studio. But if I don't have talent in front of me, I don't have anything. So I don't exactly remember when I realized that, but the next time if you're sitting in there, taking an extra 3 or 4 hours to get your snare drum sound just right, just consider the fact that your drummer is out there waiting and he doesn't really care. He just wants to hear his drums,
Yeah. Well, I liked your advice of phase checking the drums by actually just recording the drums first and then phase checking it during playback. So I'm going to start adopting that. I've been phase checking while the drummer was out there, and now I'm feeling guilty.
Yeah, well, they get it, and they get it. If things are going on and off in their headphones, they know you're working. But at the same time, I bet you haven't really ever recorded anything out of phase. So it's not that big a problem, and you can always solve it some other time. So yeah, that's cool.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for being on Recording Studio Rockstars with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've been talking for a good solid 2 hours. So thank you, all of you Rockstars, for listening all the way to here too as well. But just really wonderful to hear you tell the stories about all these records and the process you've been through. And let our listeners know how they can find you online if they want to learn more about you.
Well, I have a very simple internet presence. You can just look for me, Jim Scott. And if you want to look for my studio, it's Plyrz, like a pair of pliers, except it's spelled like the 60s, Plyrz Studios. Plyrz Studios at Gmail is my email, which is fine. And plyrzstudios.com is the studio, and check it out, and you can find me, and I hope you get in touch.
Awesome. Well, Rockstars, as usual, of course, include links to all the stuff we're talking about in the show notes. If you're on your mobile device, just click through right now and you should see a link right to the blog post. You'll find clips from YouTube, so you can go listen to the different samples of the songs and records that Jim's made. And we'll put your email in there too for people to be able to contact you. Jim, thank you so much for being on the show with us, man. Absolute pleasure. I can't wait to meet you in person.
For the second time.
Yes, indeed. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, for the second time. That's right. But for real, get a chance to talk. Now I feel like we know each other a little bit.
Okay. Well, likewise. And thanks for thinking about me.
All right, groovy. Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw. and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.